Minister, one of the great untold stories, I think, of the Irish economy is the fact that over the last 15 years or so, working people were hammered first with an austerity crisis, more recently a cost of living crisis, but in that period, corporate profits increased by up to 2021, for example, from 2012, by 235%. Now, some of us campaigned for those corporations to pay more. We now have a 15% rate, something you stubbornly resisted for a long time. And the question is, have you got projections for how much they're actually going to pay in tax in the next couple of years?
To respond.
Thank you, Deputy Boyd Barrett. At the time of Budget 2024, corporation tax was projected to reach €24.5 billion for this year and €25.8 billion for 2025. The assumption in the budget fiscal projections is that the impact of the OECD BEPS agreement on revenues will not materialise until 2026. Government's fiscal strategy is based on the assumption that a large proportion of the rise in corporation tax seen in recent years is windfall in nature, not linked to the domestic economy and likely to be transient. And that is why this government is establishing 2 new long-term investment funds to make use of these temporary receipts to prepare for future challenges. Changes to the international taxation environment are likely to have a negative impact on our corporate tax revenues over time. While negotiations in relation to Pillar 1 of the OECD's base erosion and profit shifting process are ongoing, the EU Minimum Tax Directive, or Pillar 2, was agreed in December of 2022 and introduced for companies on the 31st of December last year. Due to the novel and separate filing system for Pillar 2 returns, the first payments are not expected until 2026. While Pillar 2 is expected to bring in additional revenue, the combined impact of both Pillars 1 and 2 is estimated to result in a net reduction in Irish corporation tax receipts. Calculating this impact is a very difficult exercise. The Budget 2024 projections include a technical assumption with an estimated overall net cost of the introduction of both pillars of €2 billion relative to the baseline in 2026. The Pillar 2 introduction of a 15% minimum rate is now in effect. Pillar 2 provides for the adoption of a 15% minimum effective tax rate applicable to large companies with an annual turnover of over €750 million in at least 2 of the previous 4 years. All other companies will remain subjected to the statutory 12.5% rate in relation to trading income and a 25% rate in relation to non-trading income. And I'll update the Deputy in the next response on what we're doing.
Minister, Deputy.
Okay, but I suppose the big question is there actually going to be an effective rate of 15%? Oh, itself still a very low rate compared to what ordinary workers pay. Because I would argue that previously the 12.5% wasn't effective. I mean, if you take 2021, there were €250 billion of pre-tax profits. There was 15 billion paid in corporation tax. That's 6.1%. And that, of course, is because the taxable income is dramatically reduced by allowances and deductions. In 2021, the revenue says corporate tax expenditures, tax breaks, for the corporate sector were €39 billion. €39 billion in tax expenditures, mostly to a tiny number of corporations. So my question is, are we actually going to get a 15% effective rate? Or are we going to continue with loopholes, deductions, allowances, credits and so on that allow these incredibly profitable corporations to pay a fraction of the headline tax rate?
Minister, to respond.
Thank you, Deputy. In Ireland, our corporation tax system is statute-based. The reliefs, exemptions, credits that you refer to are clearly defined in law and they are consistently applied. So we have transposed the EU Minimum Tax Directive at this point in time, and we will apply the minimum effective rate in line with the requirements of that directive and in line with the legislation that we have passed, which is now consistent with that directive. And the issue historically has been that in Ireland we have had a relatively low rate but applied to a broad base. Many other countries, and various studies have pointed to this, have a higher headline rate but apply it to a narrower base and have many, many more reliefs and exemptions and allowances as you described them. But what we have now is an agreed rule book, an international agreement which Ireland signed up to, and it is important that we do retain incentives, and that's why the carve-out of the research and development tax credit as part of Pillar 2 was a very important instrument for Ireland.
Yeah, look, 24 billion you said, I think for next year, projected revenues. Just could you confirm that? Could you tell us what is the projected pre-tax profits for that? If 24 billion, working back on previous years, that would suggest 400 billion euro of pre-tax profits. So I'd just be interested if you could confirm that. But those allowances and credits and so on are expenditures. They are tax expenditures. That's public money given back to companies that are making absolutely enormous profits. Now you say, well, it's in law. Yes, it is. But we don't really scrutinise to the degree we should these tax expenditures. The research and development tax credit, for example, is what, 800 million? There's a very serious question whether most of that going to a small number of multinationals or that money, for example, going into research and innovation, where we have one of the lowest levels of public expenditure in the European Union, is a good expenditure of public money.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Your central thesis seems to be that multinationals are not paying enough tax in Ireland. But if you look at the data, and you look at the pattern over the last number of years, the amount of tax that we are actually collecting in Ireland on corporation tax has increased dramatically, increased multiple fold in recent years, and you know that. So profits have as well, and the amount of tax paid is, of course, a direct function of profitability. But the allowances and the credits that we have are very clear, they're transparent, they're laid out in law, and they are consistently applied. And they are now fully consistent with Pillar 2, the global agreement. And just to conclude the answer to the first point, which addresses your question around projections, I have given a commitment to Deputy Doherty and to you and others as part of the FinPer committee that my department, together with the Revenue Commissioners, will continue to work on the long-term impact of the two-pillar solution, with the goal of updating the projected fiscal impact published as part of the Stability Programme update this spring. So we will give a further update, as I believe we should do in the Stability Programme update, of what the revenue implications are for Ireland of Pillar 1 and 2.
We now move on.